Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. Throughout Vanilla, it wasn't just a journey for the players, but also the developers at Blizzard, who had been actively working on the fastest growing MMORPG to ever have existed, and that would go on to become the largest one in its category too. I mean, here we are nearly 16 years later. That's pretty good going, I would say. And Vanilla was full of content. Like, the amount of stuff they wanted to put in it was huge. Maybe not so much at the endgame, but the quests, the profession systems, the storylines, dungeons, raids, and just the world itself were enormous. The amount of things they had planned to come would soon instead be folded over into the game's first expansion, the Burning Crusade, instead of continuing onwards from patch 1.12. And with that first expansion, it was the perfect time for some big updates to some of the core elements of how the games worked. And many ideas behind the game's design did change at that point in time. Let's take a look at a few of the bigger ones for me today. One of the biggest things you can see even now in Vanilla is itemization making more and more sense throughout the duration of the raid tiers as we progress. From Molten Core or Zul'Gurub, where we have things like Braces of Stability, Band of Sulfuras, Essence of Pure Flame, Natpagel's Reel, which are useful for some classes and indeed could go to a number of different classes for loot, but it's not exactly clear where they were intended to go or who to be worn by. There's a lot of items that are just a bunch of stats. Rarely though, there are items which are very specifically designed for one class and specialization, like the Peacekeeper boots or gauntlets from ZG, but these are few and far between. If we were to look at Naxxramas loot, there are still some items in there like this, but by and large you can tell that there is a better understanding of what each class wants on its gear, especially tier gear. Molten Core had Spirit on Hunter and Paladin tier gear. Looking over at Naxx, no Spirit to be seen. Even the DPS classes will be wearing mostly their best armor type now. Remember back in Phase 1 when warriors would be decked out in leather, the Devil's Sword 2 set, Mask of the Unforgiven and True Strike shoulders? Not so much the case anymore, and this trend very much carries on over to TBC, with it being a lot easier to understand who wants what items and why. On top of this, every spec had its own tier set too, or dungeon set early on. Most classes do take advantage of at least some of their tier pieces too, depending on the strength of their set bonuses. There will still be the fact that tanks are picking up a lot of DPS gear and dual wielding for max threat in Classic, whether Prot Fury will be the go-to, or tanks are actually going to be using shields in TBC. Well, I'm not too sure of that personally, but I know for sure if people can get away with a higher threat build, it will be a thing. Overall though, itemization makes a lot more sense in TBC, and there are more items designed for your class spec specifically, which I think is something to look forward to. Secondly, is something that happens sometimes but not all the time, and that's dungeons looping at the end so you can get back to the entrance very quickly. And this will no doubt be a big deciding factor as to which dungeons will become the best to grind once TBC drops, as I'm sure it will be very popular due to avoiding the competition farming out in the open world. Now when I think to Classic and dungeons that have an easy way to exit that isn't either a Hearthstone or a Mage portal, what comes to mind is Black Fathoms Deep, where there's a very handy option at the end to teleport straight to Darnassus. Not sure what happens for the Horde, Thunderbluff perhaps? At the end of the Dead Mines there is a handy exit, but it's still kind of far to get back to the entrance again. And then there are very short dungeons like Scarlet Monastery or the Stockades, but are there any that fully loop at the end though? Not that I can think of. TBC though, this changes in a few of the dungeons at least, where the end of the dungeon is right next to the start, allowing you to very quickly and easily reset without having to relog and reset on an alt. Dungeons like Hellfire Ramparts, that one's sure to be popular at launch. Underbog ends with an overlook just from the start of the instance, and the opening of the Dark Portal, well, you never really leave the first room, I suppose. Mana Tombs and Sethic Halls have an easy exit, but Shadow Labs and Orkanite Crypts you need to do the run back. This isn't really the case with any of the Neverstorm dungeons either though. Maybe it was a bit more down to whoever designed the dungeon, feeling as though it would be a nice touch for you to have a way to exit once you're done, instead of running all the way back. This looping feature was definitely built upon in further expansions, and I'm pretty sure it's a feature in every single dungeon of Wrath of the Lich King and beyond. Next up, hubs for objectives. Things are far less spread out in the Burning Crusade. Outland compared to Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor is just so much smaller, and so many objectives are packed much more closely together. This is true for both quests and dungeons. In Classic at the moment, there are a big few hubs for questing where you can go to sometimes fill up almost your entire quest log from that one location alone. I like to think of areas like Gadgetzan in Tanaris, Marshall's Refuge in Ongoro, Thorium Point in Searing Gorge, and perhaps the biggest hub in the whole of Classic, Booty Bay and Stranglethorn Vale. Dungeons are similar, though there are a few hubs for those too. You got the likes of Maridon that has technically 3 dungeons there, Blackrock Mountain just has an enormous amount of content, and the 4 Scarlet Crusade dungeons in Tirisfal Glades, which are all packed together in one location. Many of the other dungeons though are just all over the place, as well as having sort of faction-specific dungeons where, I mean, you can go to them as the opposite faction, but it tends to be that Wailing Caverns and Ragefire Chasm are done by the Horde, and Deadmines and the Stockades by the Alliance. In TBC, more or less everything is in a hub. Questing-wise, you very much go from one area, do all the quests, go to the next, do all the quests, go to the next. For me in Hellfire Peninsula, it would look like this. I do Honor Hold, over to the Temple of Tel Helmat, as well as the couple of quests south of that, then onto Zangarmarsh, Cenarian Refuge quests, onto Telrador, Aurea Harborage, and then onto Terakar and Shattrath, and so on and so forth. It's one questing hub to the next. Whereas in Classic now, well, questing in an efficient way, without an add-on or prior knowledge, is pretty difficult actually. Everything is so all over the place. Recently on my Priest, for example, I did some quests in Red Ridge Mountains, and then I did the start of Duskwood, then I did some Wetlands quests, then I started off South Shore, went back to Duskwood, finished that off, then went back to finish off the Elite quests in the Wetlands, I started Arathi Highlands, and now I'm thinking of starting the early level quests in Stranglethorn Vale, but then again I need to go and get Thousand Needles done too before I outlevel it. So yeah, it's quite a bit more involved. TBC, it's do one zone, go next zone. Pretty straightforward. Then again, every zone is much more tailored to a specific level bracket, rather than having an enormously wide range, which is just a side effect of having a smaller world. Dungeons are very similar in this regard. Every single dungeon, apart from Magister's Terrace, are in hubs. Hellfire Citadel has 3, Corfang Reservoir has 3 too, Alkindun has 4, Caverns of Time has 2, and Tempest Keep has 3 dungeons there. It's a lot more bunched up and together. Only Shadowmoon Valley and Blade's Edge Mountain are without dungeons, but both of those have raids to make up for it. Speaking about all this talk of raids and dungeons, the content at endgame in TBC was very much expanded upon. I often hear talking about hitting level cap in Classic, doing some raids, a bit of dungeons, a bit of PvP, and then thinking to themselves, well, I'm not really sure what to do with myself now. I feel like I've done everything. I've seen all the rides at the theme park. For TBC though, there is a real chance to have a proper main. Well, hopefully at least, as long as we don't have all the prerequisite stuff for raids nerfed from launch, which I don't think we will, optimistically. Between the reputations for heroic dungeons, raid attunements, a lot more cosmetic items tied to reps, especially the optional reps like mounts, random on-use items, companion pets, daily quests now become a thing. There's a whole lot more to do once you hit level 70, and I reckon we will see even higher numbers of consistent players during TBC than we have with Classic because of these reasons. It does make the game more alt and friendly for sure, but hey, that could just be another something to work towards in the long run and allow yourself to be proud of your main character and its progression. Also, the badge gear will keep heroic dungeon content relevant even past the pre-bis leveling phase of the game, so that's another good thing from TBC for me. Finally, there becomes a notable effort to create content aimed for both crowds in TBC, most of all for the more competitively driven players. Note that Blizzard still had a rapidly growing player base moving from vanilla to the Burning Crusade, and yet they still made that choice to downgrade raid size from 40 and 20 man to 25 and 10 man. 40 man is big, 40 man is epic, but 40 man has issues. Here's a few words from Ian on why the raid size was downgraded. Bigger raid group sizes didn't necessarily make players feel more heroic. In fact, when a raid group had 15 healers and 24 damage dealers, each individual player's role was often reduced to that of a cog in a machine, as well as making raiding more accessible in terms of logistics and requisite social structures. Quite simply, it's easier to assemble 25 players than it is to assemble 40, which is hard to argue with, I think. Organising 40 people with debuff slots, buff assignments, the roster, consumable and resist gear lists, class officers, the tactics. Have you ever seen as many spreadsheets for raiding and retail, or just, a spreadsheet for WoW at all for PvE stuff? I don't think I had. I can't believe how well organised players are in Classic actually these days. Even pugs have Discord sign-up, soft reserve lists with which class can roll on which items, add-ons for soft reserves, DKP sheets. It's a lot of effort, but it really does pay off. Anyways, with the downgrade, content was scaled up in difficulty, at least at launch, to run off from Naxxramas, and your average guild just had more raid groups running. For the PvP side, those guys got arenas, which were a huge upgrade from just Battlegrounds being a real competitive format. 2s and 3s were always incredibly active, 5s a bit less so, maybe depended on your battle group though. The resilience stat was also introduced to separate PvP from PvE power gain. Burst, as you may well have seen now in Classic, is getting to very high levels. Resilience lowered the chance to be crit and crit damage, amongst other things, making fights last much longer before a winner came out. This also gave the PvP fanatics the best gear they could get, mainly from PvP. There were still some PvE items for sure, like trinkets, but it was an improvement on PvP gear in Classic in both the ways that it's got and the fact that for the most part it's just a lot of stamina. Anyways, those are just a few of the ways I think the design philosophies have changed in World of Warcraft, moving from vanilla over into TBC, and I'd say it's been for the best overall. Are there any big things which you think of when it comes to changes in TBC? Do let me know. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one very soon. If you like what you see, do give the video a like and subscribe, as there will be plenty more to come. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.